emotional companion, keeping it real. I'm your host, Alexandra Gary Stuck. I'm a therapist in San Francisco, California, passionate about helping people navigate the IVF journey. And I'm here to answer your questions, keeping things simple and offering concrete, clear tips and tools to help navigate along the really intense journey. All right, let's take our question for today. Our question comes from Elle. Elle is writing in saying she just received her calendar for her retrieval and she's completely overwhelmed. She sees a lot of dates and medications and just wonders what she's missing. She doesn't know how to prepare for the retrieval and wants to know what she should expect. Elle, thank you so much for your question. Yes, the retrieval process is very overwhelming. It's great that your clinic did give you a calendar. Sometimes some clinics don't even do that. So it's great that you have that, but it can feel quite overwhelming. And there are some things to know, some things that your clinic might not tell you in the consult or in any kind of orientation paperwork. There's some big things to keep in mind. One thing is that oftentimes there is a bit of a wait between retrieval process and transfer. So a lot of times I think when people are starting off with IVF, they think that everything's going to happen right away and it's going to be a really quick process. But unfortunately, there's quite a bit of time, at least a cycle, oftentimes more, between the retrieval process and the transfer process. For this episode, we'll just focus on the retrieval process because there's a lot to know. And we'll also focus on frozen embryo transfers in this episode versus fresh. So the other thing your clinic might not tell you is that the RE that you had your initial consult with might not be doing most of the procedures or the monitoring visits. Those are the visits where the follicles are being checked. They're the ultrasounds that are important to kind of see when the follicle will be mature and when the retrieval will happen. And your doctor, your reproductive endocrinologist, is definitely looking at those images, but might not be present for those monitoring visits, and depending on the clinic, might not be even the one doing the retrieval. So that is quite a shock to some people, and it's good to know that ahead of time. You might have selected a clinic because you were drawn to a particular RE, and it's good to know that you might be able to speak with them, and hopefully are, and know that they are definitely looking at those ultrasound images, but they might not be the one to do the retrieval or be at those individual monitoring appointments. The other thing to know is the monitoring visits themselves can be quite stressful. There are quite a few of them, usually every other day, every couple days, and it can be a nerve-wracking process to go in and see only a certain amount of follicles. The follicles are what contains the egg that those will be retrieved at the retrieval process, and it can be really discouraging to not see the amount of follicles that you're hoping. And what your clinic might not tell you is a lot can change over the course of that, say, 10 days. The other thing to know is that each person stimulates for a different amount of time. And so even in the same body, in a different retrieval round, you can have a different number of days that you're taking those medications and hoping those follicles will grow. So another important thing to keep in mind is you might have gotten quite a bit of medication, and it's okay if you don't use all the medication, and you might find yourself needing to buy more medication than anticipated. It's okay that you don't know how much medication you will need beforehand. That's very normal, and oftentimes people will buy more medication than they actually need and then end up using it in an additional cycle if needed. So in terms of the monitoring visits, it is really hard to predict what the retrieval will produce based on a monitoring visit. So a good tip is to try and stay calm as possible, knowing that one monitoring visit isn't going to predict the outcome. Even up until your last ultrasound before your retrieval, follicles are tricky. They can be hiding. It can be hard to predict how many are going to be retrieved, and unfortunately it's the other way around as well. Sometimes you see more than you actually retrieve, which is really disappointing. It's really important to know that it's really hard to predict what is actually going to be retrieved, and that's an important mantra to keep telling yourself as you go through those nerve-wracking monitoring visits. Other things your clinic might not tell you that you could just be prepared for is that cycles do get canceled. Things come up, ovulation can happen unexpectedly, and you also have the choice to determine if you want to continue with a cycle if it feels like you're not producing what you're wanting, and if it's an option, convert to something like an IUI. That is a option. Things can happen along the stimulation process where a cycle isn't going the way you want, or it does get canceled, and so that's something just to keep in mind. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but that is a possibility. And then the other thing that the clinic might not say that's really important and also could be quite stressful is that the retrieval oftentimes, for most people, does mean massive attrition, unfortunately. So you will retrieve a certain amount of follicles, eggs, a certain amount will be mature, a certain amount will then be fertilized, and then a certain amount of that number will become a blastocyst. And that number, unfortunately, is often, unless you're very fortunate, is often a lot smaller than the number of follicles, eggs that were retrieved. So it's good to go in just knowing that and if you have a partner, just knowing that it's gonna be attrition. IVF is about attrition, and you do only need that one embryo that you're going to transfer, so that's important to keep in mind. Of course, you want as many as possible, but there is going to be a loss along the way, and it's a steep loss. Obviously, that loss depends on your body and what you're working with, but there is almost in all cases quite an attrition, and that's something to just keep in mind. It can be quite drastic at every step of the way. There's a loss, so that's the retrieval, and then to what's mature in terms of the egg, and then what's actually been fertilized with the sperm. And then there's actually what can make it, what makes it to the blastocyst, more developed cellular stage, which is what we're wanting. And then, of course, if you are going on to have some genetic testing, that is also oftentimes an attrition as well. What actually is going to be the genetic euploid embryo that you're going to transfer. So the other thing that is something to know is that it often does take a couple of retrievals. Most people do more than that, what they're expecting, and it's just good to know that. It might also be helpful to be a little relieving knowing that it doesn't have to go perfect on the first round, that it is normal for people to do multiple rounds to get the amount of embryos that they're wanting. In terms of tips, so I just I shared a lot of additional information that each one of those things could feel really overwhelming. But I think it's so important as a tip to know that you can ask your care team for clarity and questions, and that's what they're there for. They are there to guide you and answer the questions, and you're not a burden to them. If you have a good care team, and you should in this process, you are not a burden. You are entitled to all the questions and solid answers to make this journey more clear and less overwhelmed. So the mantra here is ask, 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 ask. And then, of course, it's kind of cheesy, but expect the unexpected. There are curveballs in this journey, and there's most likely going to be something that happens along the retrieval that you might not have been prepared for. That's okay. It just important to remember that this is an amazing science. This is an amazing technology that we are so privileged to have access to, and it is very imperfect. And all of us, I think, want it to be more perfect than it is. And it's important just to give yourself grace. And of course, you're going to be overwhelmed. And there's so much information and so much learning in this process. Just know that we are here with you. We understand. You are definitely not alone. Thank you so much for your question. That concludes our episode for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please send me your questions at alexandrapsychotherapy@gmail.com or find me on my website, Alexandra Gary Stock. I will try to answer all your questions and incorporate one in the upcoming episode. Until then, remember, you are not alone.